Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Santucci. I'm the Assistant Forest Supervisor at DuPont State Recreational Forest. Part of my responsibilities are to manage our forestry program, which includes our prescribed burning program on the forest. Been at DuPont for just about 5 years now, but I've been a forester for nearly 40 years by education, enthusiasm, and experience. And prescribed burning has been a part of my life for most of those 40 years. We burn in the spring and in the fall on DuPont for several different reasons. I'd say the first reason is weather and fuel related. Conditions are ideal, or conditions tend to be in prescription for our burns during those times of year. You start getting into the summer months after the trees and vegetation leaves out. The humidity start to get too high and you can't get a good burn. You can't meet the objectives of your burn plan. And I'd say the other reason is once you get into the growing season in the spring, especially, there's a lot more potential to injure the residual stand, as the sap comes up in the trees, especially the thinner bark trees. There's more potential to injure the trees. So we will limit our burning. We'll cut it off as green up really starts to progress, unless we have very specific silvicultural objectives that we want a growing season burn in order to control, some vegetation, some species in favor of another. There's a lot of reasons why we burn at DuPont. There are an awful lot of benefits, and I guess I would put them in a couple of buckets. So I would say that the main reason that we burn on DuPont are to achieve ecological goals. This landscape across the southern Appalachians is fire dependent, fire adapted, and a lot of the forest communities, they need fire in them to maintain their health and maintain their resiliency. So that's one reason that we apply fire to the landscape. The other ecological reason is to increase structural diversity in the forest communities. To look at forest, folks see trees, they see canopy, they see plants and everything. But if you look at the forest a little bit more closely, it's very homogeneous. It lacks diversity. They should be very diverse forests. And so by introducing fire into these forest communities, these stands, these landscapes, it actually increases the diversity, which in turn increases species richness, whether you're talking about plants or animals, and it just creates a more robust ecosystem, a more robust landscape. Closely related to that is the silvicultural perspective. Silviculture is the art and science of establishing, managing, and tending forests. It's based in silvics. Silvics, just think of that as tree biology. So a lot of the tree species that occur in this area and the communities that they're associated with, they need fire to thrive. They need fire to germinate. They need fire to be healthy. One of the primary benefits was wildlife habitat as well. Picture behind me that you see, that is actually at the summit of Big Rock, one of the granitic domes on DuPont, super fire dependent community. It's dominated, in addition to the granite outcrops, by warm season grasses, moss, vaccinium, blueberry, and other browse and soft mast producing species for wildlife. And if fire isn't reintroduced into these domes, then we start to lose that habitat and the species that depend on them. Like on that dome right there that you see behind me, there's whippoorwills that require open space to nest and mate. It's excellent rattlesnake habitat there, and we just find species up there that we don't find elsewhere on the forest. Preparing for a burn is a months-long process. Generally have our burn units selected 18 months in advance, and scouting consists of, let's just call it three parts. I'm looking at the condition of the fire lines and see if they need any improvement or any relocation. Then I will do walkthroughs, and what I'm doing there is assessing the fuel load, because that's going to tell me how intense that fire is going to burn, and that in turn informs the tactics, namely how are we going to ignite the burn. And so as I'm doing that and looking at the fuel load there, in my mind, I'm playing out the day of the burn. All right, what's the safest and most efficient way to ignite this unit? And then the third element is throughout the entire time, I'm just assessing hazards, and probably the biggest hazard on our burn units are snags, standing dead trees. They're notorious fire magnets, ember magnets. We just don't want to leave those flaming candles, or we want to avoid them if we can. So I do that for each and every burn. And then after I walk the burns, I write what's called a burn plan or a prescription for the unit. As the burn windows get closer, as the spring season gets closer, I'm looking out maybe a week and I'm trying to identify, all right, it looks like the weather parameters, the fuel parameters are coming into prescription. I'm looking at a day or two, and as that day gets closer, it's yep, this day, everything looks like it's going to be in prescription. And so calling around, getting the resources I need in that. So that's maybe a week out. Day of the burn, resources, the folks, the burn crew that are going to help. We show up on the burn and we do a morning briefing, a pre-burn briefing, right? And these are all professional firefighters. We are all qualified to fight fire. We are all qualified to do whatever task we are asked to do on the burn. We make sure of that. So we give a morning briefing. We describe the weather conditions, the fuel conditions, what we expect the weather to do, because it will change throughout the day. Same with the fuel conditions, especially the lighter fuels. They're going to change throughout the day. Then we will give crew assignments. We go over the maps. We go over the planned ignition. Basically, I just share everything that I've been putting together with everybody on the crews. Now, what do the crews look like? I have to speak in generalities here because every burn is just a little bit different and the mix of resources is going to be a little bit different. But we're going to have a burn boss, North Carolina Forest Service certified burn boss. And then there's going to be some combination of what we call ignition crews or firing crews and holding crews. And again, the mix and the number of those folks is going to vary depending upon how wide the lines are, where the lines are located, how much exposure we have, how fast do we want to get this thing lit. So there's a lot of factors that go into that mix. A UTV or two with a slip-on tank on the back. We have a tracked dump truck with a slide-in unit. It's called an IC30, and that can get us into some pretty tough places if we need water in there. And we also have an engine with water on it. So I'd say 99% of my burns, one or more of those units are going to be on it. We have started using a UAS, a drone, quite a bit on our burns to help patrol lines, to help find spots in sleepers that we might walk by. We also use it to sweep the burn unit prior to lighting to see if anybody has gotten on a trail unbeknownst to us. So that's day of burn. Once we get the burn lit and it's doing what it's supposed to, a lot of the crews, we hang out and we do what's called mop up, put out dangerous spots, stuff near the line that's still on fire. What we want to do is reduce the smoke impacts to the trail users and to the local community. Burning on DuPont is probably a little bit different than elsewhere in the state on other state forests. And I guess I'd start with our topography. Fires, our burns are dominated by topography more than they are wind. We need to be conscious of that when we burn. I think the thing that really sets us apart is 1.2 million visitors a year. That's 1.2 million teachable moments, to teach folks about prescribed burning versus every fire is a wildfire. So that's one aspect of it. Teach them or, explain forestry to them. They can shake hands with and meet a real live firefighter. And who knows if, the family's children is with them, maybe it will inspire them into a natural resources career. On DuPont, we do have a few resource specific alterations that we make in our burning. So just ticking them off. I mean, I'll start with the biggest one, and that's the green salamander. Green salamander is a very rare salamander. I believe it's the only arboreal salamander. Essentially, it lives in deep crevices in exposed boulders on the forest, and when it comes out of those crevices, it climbs into the canopy of trees. It spends very little time on the ground. It's rare. It's only found in the Blue Ridge Escarpment. We have one of the highest population densities of these salamanders on DuPont. We work really closely with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission on our burns. We have very aesthetic areas, namely the waterfowl corridor, and we probably get 700,000 folks that walk the waterfowl corridor every year. We don't want to smoke that in. That might narrow the burn window, or not narrow the prescription, not necessarily the burn window, but narrow the direction that we can send smoke there, just depending on where we are on the forest. Or there's some really popular trails that we do our best to avoid smoking in. And again, we're ringed by development. This is not unique to DuPont. It's just something that we have to consider in terms of the day we're burning. I guess if there's any last thoughts about prescribed burning, especially here on DuPont and in Western North Carolina, it would be the hope that folks understand that fire is a natural condition. It's a natural process in these forests. It's something that has historically been applied by indigenous people in these forests. Evolved with fire, and keeping fire out of the forest is not natural. It leads to unhealthy forests. So I guess that's one hope. The other hope is if you do visit DuPont and we just happen to be burning on the day, or happen to be burning in the vicinity of a trail that you're walking and you see us out there, please stop and ask questions. Happy to share what we do, why we do it. And the last hope I would have is understand that there is a difference between prescribed fire and wildfire. A prescribed fire is done under very specific conditions that are predetermined before the first flame goes on the ground. We do it for very specific objectives on very specific pieces of ground, and we make sure that we do it under the best of conditions. Whereas a wildfire often occurs under the worst of conditions, and it's not going to confine itself to a very specific piece of ground. And the objectives are to keep firefighters and people safe, save their homes, and so forth, versus resource objectives.